On only his third day back from injury, Justin Herbert reportedly had the best practice he's ever had, and all of a sudden, this young wide receiver room came to life.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, and to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, Justin Herbert went full God mode in practice today. He apparently completed over 86% of his passes that he threw. He was absolutely on fire, which is fantastic to hear. And, we're going to get into some of the fan mail questions today. And one of the big ones is Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh enough to make this team a contender? And where is Ladd McConkey?
It's a great question. He's pretty small. He can be hard to find at times. But today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, David and everydayers out there, I'm sure you can recognize that this is the third straight show we've been leading with Justin Herbert, because ever since he's come back from his plantar fascia injury, he's been progressively getting more healthy and progressively just getting better on the field, if you read the reports. And Daniel Popper is someone I respect maybe the most out of any of the Chargers beat writers, anyone covering this team potentially, even David. But when he says that Justin Herbert might have just had the best practice he's ever had, I put a lot of weight into that. And that's exactly what Daniel Popper said happened. I mean, Eric Smith, the team writer, said something almost the same thing. Chris Rim as well, pretty similar kind of reports coming out of today's practice, which when you're a quarterback of Justin Herbert's stature, that's pretty rare to see, David. But yes, you said it. I mean, the stats speak from themselves, and they're kind of hard to believe when you're seeing them all put together. Justin Herbert, 25 of 29 in this practice, according to Eric Smith and Daniel Popper, with 5 touchdowns in team drills. That's not just one-on-ones. That's just the team drills, so not including the one-on-ones. But going 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And the crazy thing is per Daniel Popper, 2 of those incompletions were Brendan Rice slipping on a route and Quentin Johnston dropping a pass, but then coming back with a vengeance and having 7 catches somehow in this practice. David, I wish I was a fly on the fence at that practice. It seems like Justin Herbert was on another level today.
Yeah, it's just fantastic to hear. Obviously, with Justin Herbert, dealing with the plantar fascia injury, for him to work his way back in after the 2 weeks in the boot, and really just seems like he's ratcheting it up day after day after day. And he was truly phenomenal. According to Eric Smith, he said, how about a sequence where Herbert threw touchdown passes on 4 consecutive plays, 3 of which came in the red zone, and that was just Herbert just getting started. And then he said the next part of practice was a focus on 3rd and long completions, and this is how it went. On 3rd and 12, Herbert found Quentin Johnston for a first down. On 3rd and 10, he connected with Josh Palmer for a 40-plus yard completion, probably touchdown there. On 3rd and 8, he hit Donald Parham over the middle for 10-plus for a completion, and then also completed a pass to Luke Benson, the tight end, on 3rd and 7 to move the sticks. And that, to me, is just prime Herbert. Justin Herbert is the type of quarterback that has the ability to elevate the talent around him and make everybody that much better. And if you're open, he has the ability and he will get you the football.
And I just think it gives you so much more confidence and less stress about what this offense can be, even with Greg Roman, being a hire that we were critical of at the beginning. So I think when you see him at the helm, especially how much you can see how much different the offense looks as compared to what it's looked like the last couple of weeks, like, that's insane. And like me and you were talking before the show, like there's nothing to me that tells me that Justin Herbert can't be, one of the best quarterbacks, if not playing on a Patrick Mahomes level, and if not that, right behind him. Like, I truly think he has that kind of ability, and I think what you saw because of that was the elevation of the wide receivers around him. A wide receiving room that has a ton of question marks in it, but all of a sudden, right, Eric Smith is saying Quentin Johnston had his best practice that he's seen from him. 7 catches, multiple touchdowns if you include one-on-ones. I think it was at least 3 touchdowns. Simi Fehoko has a couple of catches. Brandon Rice is picking up a 3rd and 14. Donald Parham and Darius Davis both get touchdowns in team drills. And Josh Palmer looks like the best receiver on the field, not only with 2 touchdowns, but also a 40-plus yard catch, according to Eric Smith. But David, that's exactly what they need and what the Chargers were betting on when they traded Keenan Allen, when they didn't re-sign Mike Williams and had to make those tough decisions. They were betting, like the Chiefs did with Patrick Mahomes, that Justin Herbert could elevate the group of guys around him, even if it has less names that you know. And on Wednesday, for sure, he did that.
He absolutely did do that. And you said it. They are definitely very much focused and very much dependent on Justin Herbert being able to do that. But he has the ability to do that. And just imagine that Justin Herbert elevating the talent around him and also having the benefit of a strong and consistent rushing attack, which is what we expect Greg Roman to be able to deploy. Also something Justin Herbert has never had at any point in his NFL career.
Right.
So you couple his ability to elevate the talent around him with the ability to run the football. I think that's going to open up the passing lanes to be much more wide open, and wide open throwing lanes equals big explosive plays all day long for Justin Herbert.
And Greg Roman's offense can make big plays. I mean, it's partially, maybe mostly predicated on being able to run the football well and being able to take shots because of that. I think the other added bonus that you get here is with Justin Herbert's injury, you weren't sure what you were going to get, but you get a key week where Justin Herbert gets to audition all of these wide receivers, and all of these wide receivers this last week of practice get a chance to put their best foot forward with the best quarterback on this team and one of the best in the league. And that is absolutely invaluable. And also, Jesse Minter's defense all of a sudden, after, dominating for the past 2 weeks and every day as the defense dominated, Jesse Minter got shredded on Wednesday by Justin Herbert. And sometimes it happens like that. And according to Popper, a lot of these throws were just drops in the bucket where guys had good coverage and Justin Herbert's making the play anyways. But Jesse Minter was talking about Herbert after practice, and he said about him coming back, it's fantastic. Not a better thing for us defensively than having Justin on our team, both now to practice and in games. I think he's the elite of the elite. So it makes everybody better, and it makes our offense function at a higher level and makes our defense have to function at a higher level. And David, it's so true because we've heard so much about this defense, but for this defense to actually get ready for other NFL offenses that are fielding all starters, they needed this test from Justin Herbert, and he's going to push them.
Well, newsflash, you're not going up against a backup quarterback or somebody who maybe shouldn't even be a backup quarterback. You're going up against one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think that is great work for the defense because they probably have been on cloud 9. They feel like they walking around like, they're, top dogs. Like, you can't beat me. Like, I'm out here and I'm feeling myself. I got the swag. Well, guess what? Justin Herbert's back, and he's going to really test you out, really try to see how strong that conviction is on how well you are playing, because he's the type of quarterback that can make those plays that other quarterbacks can't. So now is the true test. Now is the real barometer on where that defense is.
Absolutely. And it's not like I, don't think the defense can be good now because they got shredded by Justin Herbert. He's going to do that to some good defenses this year. And I think that's the big thing here is just even the interceptions, right? I mean, every day we were talking about multiple interceptions by this defense. I think there's been one in the last 3 days, and it was a drop by Quentin Johnston that turned into an interception. So it's just, you're not going to have those plays. You're going to have to work a lot harder for him. And sometimes Justin Herbert is just going to be the best player on the field. And honestly, it's most times. But I think when you see this, you just get, hopeful that this is the start of Justin Herbert trending towards getting the respect that he deserves as one of the best quarterbacks, and getting a coach that can take him to do it, getting a GM that can give him enough weapons and build a fully functioning offense around him, because that's all Chargers fans want. They want the guy they watch every week and know better than any other NFL fan does. They get to see how good he is every week. Now he'll start stacking the wins and get taken more seriously with this around him. But is just Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh enough to actually carry this team with a below average roster? Is it a below average roster? We're going to talk about that and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about GameTime, because GameTime is the only place that you should be going if you need a ticket to any event, whether it's a sporting event, whether it's a concert, whether it's comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. Make sure you're checking GameTime, because GameTime is the best place to get your tickets. And right now, they have something new. GameTime has a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. GameTime Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. What GameTime also brings you is a panoramic view from your seat before you actually have to buy the tickets. That's huge. I mean, I used it once to get cheap tickets to a Blink-182 concert. It said they were in an obstructed view. I looked at it and I was like, I can see the stage from there. Ended up getting, $18 ticket to Blink-182 in San Diego, which is not a cheap ticket to get, but there's so many great things. You can even just go on GameTime and find out what your plans are for the evening. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, David. Well, it is a Chargers mailbag day, and the fans and the everydayers out there really provided for us. Again, so many questions that we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but just love the fact that we get to get you guys involved with the show, because we're at our best when we're getting you guys on. And we have some really, really good questions today, including, I think, a very fair question here from Benji Kaplan, who asked this: do you think that this roster can compete solely based on the fact that we have the Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh duo? Can they carry this below average roster? So, David, when it's put that way, do you think that just those two guys alone will be able to kind of carry maybe a roster that has a ton of question marks?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's enough just to have Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh. I think it's a tremendous step in the right direction. But is it, if you're just sitting here telling me you only have these two guys and not really taking in the context the roster, which I don't believe is below average. I think that's a little bit overblown, to be quite honest with you. There's some position groups that have some question marks for sure, but I don't see it as below average. But is Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert enough alone by themselves? No, and I don't believe they are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that if, Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh are magically transplanted onto the Carolina Panthers, I don't know if that team makes the playoffs, but in general, I do think so. And I do think, as far as above average, below average roster, it probably is closer maybe to the middle. Maybe it's not thought of it as that, but I think from the outside looking in, David, you have to think, people think this wide receiving core is probably one of the top, bottom five in the league. Defensive linemen, bottom 5 in the league, right? Defensive tackles, at least. Linebacking core, a lot of unknowns in that room. I've seen it ranked in the bottom third of the league. Tight ends, you don't have a big name there. You have Will Dissly, who's a great blocker, but that's not a guy that rates when you're talking about the great tight ends in this league. Neither does Hayden Hurst. So you look up and down this roster, it's a roster that has to earn their respect. And I think we're putting a lot of stock into Jim Harbaugh being able, and this coaching staff, to be able to bring more out of guys that were playing really bad. But let's be honest, if a lot of the free agents that they brought in, they expect to start play at the level they did in 2023, they're not going to be a good team. They just won't. It absolutely will be a below average roster. So I think that, Bradley Bozeman does have to have a good year. You do need guys like J.K. Dobbins to be able to stay healthy and bounce back. You need Christian Fulton to bounce back. But those guys weren't good. They have been good, but they weren't good last year. So I think we have a little bit of a biased opinion on it. I don't think many people rate this as one of the better rosters in this league. Is it close to average? I would say probably closer to average than what the national consensus is. But I do think that for me, I've said it before, if you have Jim Harbaugh and you have Justin Herbert, the bare minimum should be the playoffs. And I don't even think really that's high enough standard. I think that's a high enough standard for this year potentially, and I still think they should win a game. But I think that, it's because I think the roster is better than what some other people think it is. But We do have a Thier who's asking about potentially some tough decisions that may be coming up for this team as they try to cut this roster down to 53. Let's hear what he has for us this week.
David, my baby, this is Ethia. I got a question. Joe Hotis, our new GM, did a great job with the salary cap. But my question will be, how difficult is it going to be for him to put this 53-man roster, because most of his players is not belong to you? Thank you. Love you.
Yeah, I think what Athir is trying to ask here, just, how tough are the decisions going to be on a team that has really so much turnover, right? Like there's so many new faces. These are not guys that we've seen playing in these positions either on this team or in this offense or in this defense. So there's not a lot to go off of as far as precedent for what they're going to be able to do in 2024. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when I'm looking at this roster, like there was always going to be a lot of turnover, especially when you bring in a new GM, a new head coach, a new defensive coordinator, a new philosophy on how you want to play the game, right? You have to get the right type of players that are going to be able to execute the schemes in which you are going to deploy. So there's always going to be turnover. I expect there's going to be probably at least 15 or more people or players that were not on last year's roster that will be on this year's 53-man roster. So there's going to be a lot of turnover. I think, when you look at this particular team, I think there's really only 3 or 4 spots, I think, that are probably like legitimately going to be difficult decisions. I think other than that, this roster is mostly set.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with you. I do think that there's a lot of competition at certain positions that's going to depend on a lot on how many guys they end up deciding to keep at certain positions. So I think you're underselling it a little bit because I do think there are tough decisions, right? You have to decide whether you want 3 or 4 running backs. So it might not be as easy as keeping, Kamani Vidal and Jarrett Patterson, who's probably, the 2 guys who have played the best, right? You're looking at wide receiver. We know that's one of them, right? I think you look at the defensive line, the bottom of that group. How many are you going to keep there? That's a hard decision. Tight end, are you going to keep 4? Are you going to keep Stone Smart and Donald Parham? That's a tough decision. At linebacker, you have 5 dudes, right? Nick Neiman, Troy Dye. You also have your 2 starters in Dan Henley and Denzel Perryman and a rookie. Like, are you going to keep all 5 of those guys? How many safeties are you going to keep? So I do think it's going to be really tough, and I think that's a really good example of how much competition that Joe Ortiz has brought to the bottom of this roster, that you have so many guys playing to try to save their job this weekend. And on Friday's show tomorrow, we'll be able to get into who has the most to prove. And a lot of those guys are going to be on there. But I do have another question here from XFlow Primo, who says, should we get worried if the offense doesn't score a touchdown in the 3rd preseason game? David, Cameron Dicker scored all the points so far. Should we be concerned if that keeps going? Or maybe no one scored, maybe they don't even get that in game 3.
I think for me, the concern lies with the quality of the backup quarterback that we've been seeing. Just Easton Stick has just proven game over game that it's just not good enough. But am I going to panic? No, I'm not going to panic because there's 2 very important elements of this offense that have not seen any snaps at all in the preseason. First and foremost, Justin Herbert obviously hasn't played a single snap, and also the 1-2, the 2-headed monster at running back in the rushing game. And J.K. Dobbins and, Edwards, Gus Edwards, have not also seen a single snap in the preseason. And those guys are going to factor in heavily in the way this offense executes itself on, a game in, game out basis.
Yeah, I think there's only so much you can put into an offense that's getting led by Easton Stick and Luis Perez, right? So from that standpoint, as far as would I be concerned about what this offense is going to look like as a whole? No, not really, because I don't think we're going to see as many starters in this game as we have in the first 2 games. I think you gave guys like Denzel Perryman and DJ Chark and all those guys, Alohi Gilman, Christian Fulton, right? I don't think we're seeing those guys in game 3 potentially. I mean, you saw what you needed to see, I think, from them. For me, the concern is, okay, can we still see the same level of kind of connectivity in the running game, right? Does the running game still look like it's functioning? And I think also my biggest concern about just if this team doesn't get the offense going in preseason week 3, are they going to have a good enough evaluation to make the right decisions at the end of this roster, right? Are they going to get to see enough from each of these running backs to make an informed decision in their tight ends and the wide receivers and all those guys? So if we have another game like week 1 where, the wide receivers have a total of 4 catches, that does concern me. As far as what I think about, how this affects what we're going to see in the regular season from this offense as a whole, not concerned. Because as we saw today, when Justin Herbert is out there, it looks like a completely different offense. But we still have many big things to get into, including where's Ladd McConkey been? I mean, we all know we have high expectations from him, but maybe we haven't seen that kind of production reported at practice. Is there any concern there? We're also going to get into the wide receiver dilemma at the end of this team. 6 or 7 wide receivers. How much does the other guy getting picked up afterwards by another team play into the decision of who they're going to keep, and much more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel, because FanDuel, as you know, is America's #1 sportsbook, and we're always talking about it. But they have something a little bit different going on for you, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's a present that just keeps on giving. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel it anytime. Unfortunately, our Padres run is over because Matt Waldron got absolutely shellacked. That's okay, because we're getting so close to football season. I definitely wanted to keep it with football. And today, we have college football coming up this weekend. So we're going to go with the alma mater of Florida State from Derwin James, Asante Samuel Jr., and we're going to pick Florida State to cover the 10.5-point spread against Georgia Tech this weekend in Ireland to kick off the college football season. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Dave, we have more Chargers mailbag questions to get into because we had a ton of good ones today and it was hard whittling it down. But thank you to the everydayers as always. And thank you guys as always for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Football, because that is a podcast you're going to want to listen to this time of year to make sure that you're ready for your draft, and also to make sure you don't have to do an insanely ridiculous, embarrassing punishment in front of all your friends or in a public setting and then go viral and live forever on the internet. So to make sure you don't do that, go subscribe or follow for free to Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. David, we have more mailbag questions to get into, and I wanted to start with this one, which I think is a fair question, especially when you're kind of basing everything what you're hearing from reports coming out of the beat writers from training camp practices. And it's from Meerkat Manor, who asks, despite some praise here or there, I feel like I've heard more talk and seen more highlights of every receiver not named Ladd McConkey. Is this a he's so solid it's unremarkable situation, or am I completely off base? David, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not really concerned about the lack of mentions for Ladd McConkey, at least as of late, because earlier on in the offseason, Ladd McConkey was everywhere. He was all over the field, catching passes left and right. Everyone was raving about his route running ability, his ability to separate the hands, everything, from that perspective has been spoken of very, very highly from media members and coaches alike. So am I concerned about Ladd McConkey? Not at all. I think, and I still feel very strongly that he is going to have a big impact on this Chargers offense, especially on third downs.
Yeah, I think that, that he's so solid, it's unremarkable situation definitely makes sense, right? Like, because I don't think he's the type of receiver that you're going to be seeing making, a one-handed catch in the corner of the end zone, jumping over Cam Hart, right? Like, that's just not what his game is. I think the other part of his game that's pretty electric is what he's able to do after the catch, which is kind of nuked when you're not playing live and guys can basically just get close to you and the play is ruled down, right? Yeah. So I think that's big part of it is, hey, he's just missed a big chunk of time, right? Like, he was doing great at OTAs. He got hurt at the beginning of training camp and missed, one preseason game. But I think him also only playing 9 passing snaps in the second preseason game probably tells you that they feel like they know what they're getting from Ladd McConkey and that he's going to be a major part of this offense. And per Eric Smith, he had 2 20-plus yard receptions just today with Justin Herbert lining everything up. So I'm not worried about him. I do think he's going to have a huge role if healthy. I think he can lead the team in receptions if he's healthy, truthfully. But let's get to this one here from Seth Campbell, who I think has a question that's on a lot of people's mind right now, which is, my question is tied to our wide receiver dilemma with Brandon Rice and Simi Fehoko. If you're playing GM and one has to go to the practice squad, would your calculus include the probability of them being snatched up by another team? I feel like Brandon Rice will, maybe due to the name and his dad, but Fehoko bolt up. So I think it's a great question because I know we've seen the Chargers do this. It is a little bit of gymnastics you do around this time of the year, a little bit of trickery potentially if you think somebody's going to get snatched up by another team. You could keep them, right, and then figure out what you want to do, maybe even send them to the practice squad later when all the teams have already filled all the spaces they need to fill and they have less flexibility. I think this is a good question. I think the part that's getting undersold here is that like Simi Fehoko wouldn't have very much interest, right? Because he's played really, really well. He's been the guy that more teams are going to be able to have eyes on because of what he's actually done in the preseason game, which is 3 20-plus yard catches in 2 weeks with a almost borderline unwatchable offense, which I think is really impressive. The other thing is, I don't know about Brandin Rice, right? Like, I know obviously coming in, he had a decent profile, but we're also talking about a dude who was a 7th-round pick, right? Every team passed on him at least 6 times before the Chargers got to pick him, and more than that in most cases. So it's a good question, but definitely something that comes, that definitely factors into it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, is it part of the decision-making process? Yeah, I'm sure it's a small part of it, but if we listen to what Jim Harbaugh has been talking about and what he's been saying is, hey, how do we know who the best players are? They play the best. And I mean,
Sure.
if that is, how he is basing the decision, then I don't know how you can come to any other conclusion other than Simi Fehoko has earned this spot. I mean, up to this point, he has made the plays on offense. He is a core 4 special teams contributor. He's making tackles on special teams. He's blocking exceptionally well. Like, Simi Fehoko's done everything that he possibly could in his power to make this roster. And, Brandin Rice has made plays in practice. We've heard it all off season, but Simi Fehoko's made plays in practice as well and in the games as well. So that's where, for me, I feel like it's, a part of the decision-making process, but the smallest part.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I would push back on that is because, I mean, if you listen to Greg Roman's press conference, like, it felt like he went way out of his way to make sure everybody knew that Brandin Rice's struggles were not on Brandin Rice. And he said, listen, at this part, it's not about the productions, it's about the process, and it's about what we see, right? And I think he's right? Like, I mean, Brandin Rice, has had, I think, 1 catchable target during the preseason. There's only so much you can do about that. So I don't know if they're putting too much stock in that. But, man, I mean, Simi Fehoko has been really, really good in practice. He's been good in the preseason. If he gets cut, it's hard for me to imagine there isn't another team that's interested in picking up his services, unless the Chargers do something a little bit unconventional with their roster building. And we have this here from JT the Nut, who asks, Harbaugh has been truthful with just about everything so far. He mentioned the possibility of 7 wide receivers making the roster. What's the percentage that it actually happens? So he did say that, right? I think the context is important. I think you have to watch kind of the way he said it. I mean, he basically said, hey, it's not impossible.
It's impossible.
So much goes into these, though. Like, you're getting input from every coach, right, when you're trying to make these decisions. And they're getting involved with Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz. And Jim Harbaugh is going to have, the final say, I'm sure, if things are close, right? And he has a roster building preference as a guy who's built championship rosters. At the same time, though, every coach is going to want to go to bat for their guys, right? Every coach is going to make, the argument for their guys. But Ryan Ficken also is going to have a big say in that too, right? And Jesse Minter's going to have a big say in that too. Greg Roman, the same thing. Hey, who do we need to make it work? And then it's up to Joe Ortiz to make the numbers work. And there's going to be some hard decisions. But David, if you're putting a percentage chance on the Chargers keeping 7 wide receivers, where would you put it at?
Yeah, I think it's a really low percentage for me. I think it's just really, really hard to be able to keep 7 wide receivers. I just think from a roster building standpoint, that means you're having one less linebacker, 1 less defensive lineman, one less defensive back. You got to take from one of these other position groups that you would normally have a specific number. So as far as percentage, I'm putting it at like 15-20%. I think it's fairly low.
Yeah, I think I'd probably bump it up maybe a little bit higher than that, and it's only just because I think that is such a hard decision they're going to have to make, right? I mean, either a guy they just drafted and cutting both of their 7th-round picks that they took this year at wide receiver, or a guy who's just absolutely lit it up, and also, has NFL experience, which is important, and plays special teams like you're talking about. I'd probably put it at 30%. Like I talked about on another show, right? The Ravens did it in 2021 with a Greg Roman offense and a Joe Ortiz front office, right?
Yeah.
It's possible, for sure. We've talked about positional flexibility between some guys as well, potentially opening things up. If I had to guess, I would say it doesn't happen, right? But I do think that it is such a difficult battle that it's hard to say it with any kind of certainty, right? I mean, according to Greg Roman, there's more than 7 guys, right, in that conversation. Like, I think he has to say that to a certain extent.
He does.
But it is super competitive, right? You had, guys even like a Jalen Johnson and Jalen Gill standing out on special teams. And you have a Cornelius Johnson who you drafted. And they need to all think that they're still in the race going into this final game, right? but it is going to be tough. And I mean, it seems, when asked about it, even with what he's done so far, which is what we're basing this off of, what did Greg Roman say about Simi Fehoko? He's one of the guys who's battling for a roster spot on this team right now. And when he said it, I believed him. I don't think it's a for sure thing at this point. I don't think that decision's been made. It could go either way.
Yeah.
They could potentially keep 7. We'll see. But like you said, it has to come from somewhere. So that's what the hard decisions we were talking about in the last segment, where, hey, it might seem like a lot of positions are set, but I think there's a way underrated amount of hard decisions that are on the horizon for this front office and this coaching staff. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Tomorrow, we're going to be getting into exactly who has their last chance to be able to put their best foot forward. I mean, Donald Parham, former tight end 1 at times for this team, on the bubble going to the last game. Simi Fehoko versus Brendan Rice in their last chance with live bullets to show what they can do. So much good stuff tomorrow. I can't wait to get into it because there's a lot going into this last game. So to make sure you guys don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. And you can also find the show and make sure you don't miss it by following us on all of our social media. You can find us on Twitter, where everyone asked their Twitter questions today at Locked On LAC. You can find us on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drugmeyer at Dro Talk SD. But thank you to everyone like Athir and everyone else whose voicemails we couldn't get to today, calling in to 323-524-7924 and getting your 30-second or less Chargers question in there. We love hearing your guys' voices, and we had good ones that we're probably going to save for other shows because we had some really, really good ones in the voicemails tonight. But make sure you guys are back here tomorrow as we preview the final Chargers preseason game with so much on the line. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.